Midnight. The kitchen breathes with fire. Shadows climb the walls as flames lick the blackened pots. Water boils, hissing like a serpent coiled in the dark. The air tastes of iron. A muffled scream breaks through the steam, short, sharp, strangled. Then the clang of a knife against stone. It rolls once across the floor, then stops. Silence floods the room, heavy as smoke, a whisper, almost carried by the fire itself. 1725, Bahia, Brazil. A man of wealth disappears, and in the morning, his children are fed. The silence holds, the water keeps boiling. Dawn crept over the cane fields, pale light bending across rows of stalks, swaying in the humid wind. The white-walled mansion sat above it all, proud and watchful, like a sentinel that had forgotten mercy. From the quarters below came the sour smell of sweat, smoke and rot, braided with the sweetness of boiling sugar. The bells of the chapel tolled late that morning. Father Gabriel was the one who rang them, his hand unsteady, his eyes bleary with sleeplessness. His cassock was worn, edges stained with ash. He moved through the courtyard with his notebook tucked under one arm. He had the air of a man who carried too many secrets but had no strength left to bury them. At the foot of the steps, he met Donna Inés. She was small, hard-faced, her hair bound tightly under a kerchief. In her hands, she clutched a set of keys that jingled whenever her fingers trembled. She stood stiff, as though the mansion itself had chained her there. "Where is he?" Gabriel's voice was low, almost conspiratorial. Inés pressed her lips tight. "Dom Rodrigo has not left his chamber since last night. No word, no sound." The priest's brow furrowed. "And the children?" Her eyes flicked to the window, above. "Crying since dawn. Little Isabel begs for her father. Tiago pounds the table and curses. None will eat." Father Gabriel drew the sign of the cross, though his eyes stayed fixed on the closed shutters. "And the cook?" Inés lowered. Her voice gone. The kitchen is empty, pots unwashed, fire still smolders. The courtyard seemed to tighten around them. Slaves passed quietly in the distance, carrying buckets, baskets, tools, though each slowed to glance. No one spoke of it aloud, yet the air was already swollen with rumor. "Perhaps he rode to town," Gabriel suggested, though even as he said, doubt weighed each word. "No horse was taken," Inés answered sharply, "and his watch, his cloak, both still hang in the hall." The priest exhaled slowly, the humid air clinging to his lungs. He scribbled something in his notebook, pausing to stare at the ink as though it might accuse him. "If he is gone," he muttered, "then God himself must have led him from this house." Inés shook her head. Her voice broke to a whisper. "No, Father, God doesn't walk these halls." Above them, a child screamed out, Tiago's voice, harsh and wild. "Where is he? Bring me food. Where is she?" His fists hammered the window frame until the shutters rattled. Inés flinched. Gabriel closed his notebook. The morning sun climbed higher, striking the white walls with cruel brightness. From the fields below, whispers began to coil like smoke, carried from mouth to mouth. The master was gone, the cook had vanished, and something in the house reeked of sorrow. Father Gabriel turned toward the chapel bell once more. "Secrets," he murmured to no one. "Never stay buried in Bahia." The bell tolled again, but this time it sounded less like prayer and more like warning. The kitchen was her cradle. Marcelina's first breaths rose with the steam of boiling cassava. Her mother had labored through birth on the dirt floor by the hearth, chained by circumstance and overseer, and by sunrise she was gone. The infant was laid in a basket by the embers, and it was said the fire itself claimed her as its child. By the time she could walk, she was already carrying pots heavier than her arms allowed. The cooks laughed at first, until they realized she never cried. Silence was her language, and silence became her strength. Years passed. Her hands bore the smell of iron and smoke. Every night, she took a small kitchen knife from the block and sharpened it against stone. It was not rebellion then, only habit. The rasping sound was her lullaby, a rhythm in the dark. The others whispered about it. The girl sharpens steel, but she has no tongue. One morning the master entered, asked her. Dom Rodrigo was a man cut from arrogance and cruelty, his boots polished, though his cane fields bled men dry. A golden pocket watch hung from his vest, ticking loud enough to drown the cries of children. He liked to pull it from his pocket during punishments to measure pain in seconds. He found Marcelina standing by the oven, her eyes fixed on the bread she had dared to take. Rodrigo's voice was velvet soaked in poison. "Do you think I built this house so you could feed like a queen?" Marcelina lowered her gaze but said nothing. He stepped closer, flicking open the watch. "Tick, tick, tick, on your knees!" The overseer's whip cracked, her back opened in red lines. She did not scream. The only sound was the steady march of the watch, its golden face catching the kitchen fire. Rodrigo smiled, satisfied that silence meant defeat. That night, in the dark of the slave quarters, her little sister pressed close. Rosa was 4 years younger, a fragile spirit with wide eyes and a voice that could soften even hunger. She hummed. As she stroked Marcelina's hair, the melody trembling like candlelight. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Marcelina finally spoke, her voice quiet as smoke. Not as much as his laughter. Rosa kept humming, rocking her sister gently. The tune would return again and again, soft, haunting, never forgotten. As years stretched, Marcelina grew tall, shoulders squared from lifting kettles and grinding corn. Her silence became infamous. When others begged or wept, she stared. The knife still hissed across stone each night, sharpening, whispering. Dom Rodrigo grew crueler with age, feasting off the fear he cultivated. He used his watch as others used a whip, dangling time itself over their heads. When a slave faltered in the fields, he would open it. Tick, tick, tick. "You have 3 seconds, he would say, and the seconds always ended in blood. Marcelina saw Rosa shrink under his gaze. Rosa's lullabies grew softer, almost lost in the crackle of cane fires. Yet she never stopped singing, even when Rodrigo sneered. One evening, the sisters sat outside the kitchen, moonlight falling across the dirt. Rosa's voice floated into the night. "Someday we'll be free. Someday we'll walk where the sea meets the sky." Marcelina's jaw clenched. She looked at the knife in her hand, its blade glinting pale under the moon. "Do not dream too loud," she whispered. Rosa smiled faintly. "Then you dream for me." But dreams were dangerous on this plantation. Rodrigo's punishments fell hardest when hope dared to show itself. A memory seared itself into every witness. The day Marcelina, barely 13, carried a tray of bread past the hall. Rodrigo stopped her, demanding she kneel. When she hesitated, he yanked the tray and spilled the bread across the floor. "Kneel," he commanded, flicking open the watch. "Tick, tick, tick." Marcelina knelt, not for him, but for Rosa, who watched from the doorway. The whip lashed again. Later, Rosa tended her wounds, humming that same lullaby. Marcelina pressed her forehead to her sister's and whispered, "One day his watch will stop." The years carved them into opposites. Rosa, the gentle dove who sang through pain. Marcelina, the iron vessel that absorbed it in silence. Together they endured, bound by blood, bound by fire. But the plantation itself was a beast that devoured innocence. The sugar harvests demanded bodies. The church bells demanded obedience. The white mansion loomed like a god that had outlawed mercy. And beneath it all, the kitchen knife kept its rhythm each night, sharpened, honed, waiting. Marcelina never looked at Rodrigo without hearing the tick of that golden watch, each second a promise of reckoning. The kitchen was not just fire and knives, it was memory. Marcelina had learned its secrets from an older woman named Sabina, her hands scarred from decades of burns. Sabina's voice rasped like dry leaves, yet her knowledge flowed deep. "Food can heal," she told Marcelina, dropping a pinch of crushed leaves into a pot. "And food can kill. The difference is patience." Sabina died one summer, her body weakened by years of toil. On her last night, she pressed a bundle of herbs into Marcelina's hand. "Use them wisely. Every plant is a prayer and a curse." From then on, Marcelina worked the kitchen with a sharper eye. She tasted bitterness in roots, sweetness in berries, danger in blossoms. In the quiet hours of dawn, she ground herbs. With a pestle, testing mixtures. Some soothed wounds, some brought sleep, some curdled the stomach. She hid the jars beneath loose floorboards. In the fields, Mateus swung his machete with the strength of two men. His shoulders gleamed with sweat. Under the sun, and when he laughed, it was a sound rare enough to draw stares. Around his neck hung a small charm carved from bone, an heirloom his father had shaped before the lash took him. One night, he slipped into the kitchen through the back door. Marcelina was sharpening her knife, the rasp filling the silence. "Still, at it," he teased softly. Her eyes lifted. "Steel must be ready. Steel won't set you free." He pulled the bone charm from his chest and placed it in her palm. But love might. She studied it, her face unreadable. Then she allowed herself the faintest smile. "Love won't stop him." Mateus leaned close, lowering his voice. "Then one day we run. Bahia is wide. The sea is wider. Beyond it, freedom." Marcelina closed her hand around the charm but said nothing. Hope was a dangerous flame. Their secret meetings continued. In the cane fields, when shadows stretched long, they would pause. Together, their whispers lost among the rustle of stalks. At night, he would slip into the kitchen, bringing her stolen mangoes, laughter, and the promise of escape. But the walls had ears. Rodrigo's overseer watched with suspicion. Dom Rodrigo himself remained blind to his wife's silence. Donna Beatriz was pale, her skin powdered white, her lips painted crimson, though they rarely spoke. She drifted through the mansion like a ghost, clutching her rosary, her eyes forever on mirrors. One evening, she found Marcelina arranging dishes in the hall. Beatrice's voice was soft but brittle. "Do you know what it is to be invisible?" Marcelina looked at her cautiously. Beatrice's hand trembled against the banister. "He doesn't see me. He never did. To him, I'm just another piece of furniture, a doll with painted cheeks." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying, desperate. "But you, he watches you." Marcelina lowered her gaze. Silence was her answer. Beatrice turned away, whispering, "I envy your silence." Meanwhile, Rosa grew weaker. The little girl's cough echoed through the nights, her body thin from too little food, too much labor. Marcelina would cradle her, feeding her small, spoonfuls of broth infused with herbs that soothed her breath. Rosa hummed her lullaby between coughs, fragile yet stubborn. "We'll sing by the sea someday, you'll see." Marcelina stroked her hair, whispering back, "Rest, save your song." But Dom Rodrigo's cruelty spared no one. When the harvest faltered, he blamed the slaves. The whip cracked louder, meals grew smaller. Rosa's face hollowed. Mateus confronted Marcelina one night as she tended Rosa. His voice burned with urgency. "She won't survive this place. We must leave." Marcelina's eyes were cold, steady. "And if he hunts us? Then we fight." He gripped her hands. "Better to die running than die on our knees." She looked at Rosa, the girl humming despite her weakness, and shook her head. "Not yet, not while he breathes." Mateus clenched his jaw, frustrated. "Your silence will bury us all." Her answer was the scrape of the knife against stone. Outside, the fields rustled like a restless sea. Inside, Rosa's lullaby lingered, fragile against the weight of chains. The cellar smelled of mold and damp earth. Chains rattled faintly in the dark, though no one was bound. Rosa's voice quivered down the stairs that night, not in song, but in muffled sobs. Dom Rodrigo's boots echoed against stone, heavy, deliberate. His golden watch ticked as he descended, the sound cutting through her cries. "Do you think tears soften me?" he asked, pulling her forward by the wrist. Rosa's small frame trembled in his grasp. She whimpered, "Please, senor, please." Rodrigo's lips curled. The world doesn't bend to beggars. When he shoved her against the wall, the house above was silent. Only the steady tick-tick-tick of his watch marked the passage of cruelty. By dawn, Rosa lay fevered on a cot in the kitchen, her breath shallow, her eyes distant. Marcelina sat beside her, spooning broth laced with herbs, but Rosa turned her head weakly. He broke something in me," she whispered. Then she hummed her lullaby, softer than ever before, as if to hide her shame in melody. Marcelina's jaw clenched. She pressed a damp cloth to Rosa's brow, whispering, "Hold on, I'll mend you." But no herbs could mend what had been shattered. Within a fortnight, Rosa's cough worsened, her frame thinned, and one night, her song ended mid-note. The next morning, the plantation stood still. Even the cane seemed to bow. Joachim carried the body to the burial ground. He was a man of brute shoulders, his whip coiled at his belt like a serpent. His eyes were narrow, cold, devoted only to Rodrigo. The slaves called him the whip in Rodrigo's hand. Marcelina walked behind, her steps steady though her face was ash. Father Gabriel muttered prayers, his voice breaking between Latin verses. The community gathered in silence, each pair of eyes a witness, though none dared speak. As the earth swallowed Rosa, Marcelina placed a small flower on the grave. Her fingers lingered, trembling not with grief, but with fire. Dom Rodrigo approached, his golden watch glinting in the sun. He looked down at the grave, as if it were nothing more than a patch of dirt. Then he turned to Marcelina, his voice sharp enough to cut bone. "Even the worms feast before you do." Gasps rippled among the slaves, though quickly silenced by Joachim's glare. Marcelina's eyes rose to meet Rodrigo's. She said nothing. She didn't weep. She didn't kneel. She only stared until he shifted uneasily, closing his watch with a snap. That night, whispers spread through the quarters. Some said Marcelina's silence was more dangerous than a scream. Others swore they saw her sharpening the knife longer than usual, sparks flying like tiny stars in the dark. In the chapel, Father Gabriel wrote in his book, "The girl has lost her song, but gained her fire, and fire, once lit, consumes." Tecum, plantation returned to its brutal rhythm, but something had shifted. Rosa's lullaby lingered in memory, carried in hushed tones between slaves, sung under breath while cutting cane. It became both prayer and warning, and in the kitchen beneath the floorboards, jars of herbs waited. The knife gleamed. The fire crackled. Marcelina had made her vow. The kitchen became her sanctuary and her battlefield. By day, Marcelina stirred stews, baked bread, and fed the master's children. By night, she worked in silence, grinding herbs with the mortar and pestle Sabina had left her. The sound echoed like a heartbeat in the still air. Francisco often lingered nearby, a boy no older than 12, barefoot and quick-eyed. He had been assigned to fetch water and wood, but he had chosen Marcelina as his shadow. His hands were always smudged with soot, his voice eager. "Teach me," he whispered one evening as she crushed leaves into powder. Marcelina gave him a long look. His loyalty was clear, but loyalty was dangerous. Finally, she nodded. "Watch, and never speak of what you see." He grinned, wide and trusting. "I won't, not even in my dreams." She set a bowl before him, letting him stir. The boy's small arms struggled against the heavy paste, yet his smile didn't falter. A witness had been chosen, though neither spoke of it aloud. Upstairs, the household was unraveling. Tiago, Rodrigo's eldest son, strutted through the halls like a wolf in training. Barely 17, he already mirrored his father's cruelty. He taunted the slaves, tugged Isabel's hair until she wept, and often demanded food at odd hours just to watch Marcelina bow. He carried his arrogance like a weapon. "Faster, woman," he sneered one night as she served him stew. "Father, the silence is obedience, but I think you're deaf." Marcelina placed the bowl before him without a word, her eyes fixed on the steam. Her knife waited on the counter, gleaming. Isabel, younger by 2 years, was his opposite. Wide-eyed, gentle, she often hid in the kitchen instead of the parlor. She preferred Marcelina's company to her mother's hollow chatter. "Will you tell me a story?" Isabel asked, curling on a stool as Marcelina kneaded dough. Francisco chuckled. "She doesn't tell stories, she just stares." But Isabel leaned closer, whispering, "I like her silence. It feels like a secret." Marcelina's hands paused only a moment before resuming their rhythm. A faint smile touched her lips. In Isabel's innocence, she saw the faint echo of Rosa. The plan took shape slowly. She gathered herbs in careful measures, one to numb, one to burn, one to kill. She labeled them with scratches of charcoal on cloth and hid them beneath the kitchen floorboards, pressing them under the plank where she kept Rosa's lullaby folded on a scrap of parchment. Each night, she stared at the fire longer than she should. Flames rose and fell, tongues of orange licking the iron pots. The fire whispered promises. It was patient. So was she, but patience invited danger. One evening, Joachim stormed into the kitchen, whip hanging loose at his side. His boots dragged mud across the floor. "Something stinks here," he muttered, scanning the shelves. His eyes narrowed at the mortar on the counter, flecks of powder clinging to its edge. Marcelina stood calm, her knife in hand. "What's this?" Joachim demanded, reaching for the floorboards. Francisco froze, eyes wide. Marcelina slid the knife, down hard, chopping onions in a single stroke. The sharp scent flooded the room. Tears stung Joachim's eyes as he coughed, waving smoke away. "Rotten onions," she said flatly. He scowled, rubbing his nose. "Keep your filth cleaner, woman." He spat on the floor and left. Francisco let out a breath only when the door shut. Marcelina pressed a finger to her lips. Silence again became their shield, but danger struck from another corner. Tiago, impatient, stormed into the kitchen late one night, grabbing a spoon from a simmering pot. He raised it to his mouth before she could move. "Hungry," he grumbled. "Marcelina's," and shot out, gripping his wrist. Her eyes burned into his. "Not ready," she said, breaking her silence. It startled him enough to make him laugh. "She speaks. All these years, and she speaks to me." He flung the spoon back into the pot and swaggered out. Francisco whispered shakily, "Was it poisoned?" "Not yet," she answered, her gaze fixed on the bubbling broth. The nights grew, heavier with plotting. She wrote letters in charcoal, prayers to Rosa, promises of vengeance. She tucked them under the boards beside the jars. Each step was ritual. Herbs ground to dust, broth stirred clockwise 3 times. Fire tended until its glow matched the rage in her chest. Francisco learned the rhythm. Isabel hummed lullabies as if she sensed the secret. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, listening, and always above it all, the golden watch ticked in Rodrigo's pocket, its sound drifting through the mansion like a challenge. Soon, she promised herself, the watch would stop. The night reeked of rum before Dom Rodrigo even crossed the threshold. His boots struck the floorboards unevenly, his laugh booming through the empty hall. The golden watch glimmered against his chest, swaying as he staggered toward the kitchen. Marcelina was waiting, The hearth glowed steady, flames licking the iron pot, broth simmering thick with herbs. She stood silent, ladle in hand, her face unreadable. Rodrigo pushed the door open with his cane, grinning. "Ah, my mute little shadow. Still at the fire, are you?" He slumped into a chair, the wood groaning under his weight. "Feed me, fill me till I drown." She set the bowl before him, steam curling like whispers. He sniffed the air, lips curling. "Smells richer than usual. Who did you poison for this flavor?" His laugh was jagged, cruel. "No matter, a king deserves a feast." The spoon clattered as he shoveled stew into his mouth. Grease dripped down his chin, the sound of his chewing obscene in the silence. Marcelina stood still. Her hands tightened. Around the ladle, knuckles white, the fire hissed. Rodrigo smirked between mouthfuls. "You think silence makes you noble? You're a shadow girl, a shadow that bends when I move." Then it began. His grin faltered. The spoon slipped from his hand, striking the bowl with a hollow clang. He clutched his throat, his breath catching. "What?" He coughed, choking on the word. Sweat glistened on his forehead. "What did you?" He staggered up, overturning. The chair. His boots scraped against stone. As he lurched toward her, Marcelina backed into the hearth, her eyes unflinching. With one hand, she seized the iron bar and shoved it across the door. The lock clanged shut. Rodrigo's eyes widened. "No! No!" His body convulsed, poison tearing through his veins. He staggered to the pot, gripping its rim for balance. The watch fell from his vest, clattering against the stone. Tick, tick, tick. Marcelina seized the ladle, dipping it deep into the boiling broth. With a single motion, she flung the scalding liquid across his chest. Rodrigo screamed. The sound tore through the mansion like thunder. Flesh blistered, steam rising with the stench of burning skin. He stumbled back, howling. Upstairs, children awoke. Isabel's voice quivered. "Father?" Tiago shouted. "What's happening?" Their footsteps pounded the floor. Rodrigo clawed toward the stairwell, but Marcelina stood in his path. She lifted the pot itself, tilting it slowly. "Please," he gasped, saliva and blood mixing on his lips. "You are nothing." The pot tipped. The boiling stew cascaded over him, a tide of fire. His screams split the night, mingling with the crackle of flames. Isabel cried from above, "Papa!" Tiago bolted down the stairs, his eyes wide with terror. He stumbled into the kitchen doorway, just as Joaquim appeared, whip uncoiled in his hand. "Stay back," Tiago shouted, trying to push past, but Joaquim's grip was iron. He yanked the boy by the collar, dragging him toward the chaos. "You'll watch," he hissed. Rodrigo writhed on the floor, his flesh blistering, the golden watch ticking beside him like a mocking metronome. The kitchen filled with the sickening scent of sugar and charred skin, sweetness rotting into horror. Marcelina's face was lit by the fire. Shadows carved her features into something more than human, something eternal. Rodrigo's eyes locked on hers, blood streaming from his mouth. He rasped, voice broken. "You were nothing." She crouched beside him, her voice low, steady, final. "Now I am everything." The fire roared as if in agreement. Above, Isabel screamed again, but the sound was swallowed by the hiss of boiling water and the ragged death rattle of Dom Rodrigo. Joaquim held Tiago firm, his eyes gleaming, not with fear, but with strange devotion, as though he believed even this end belonged to Rodrigo's will. Rodrigo's body convulsed once more, then stilled. The golden watch ticked on, echoing through the silence. Tick, tick, tick. Marcelina reached down and crushed it under her heel. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was not absence. It was judgment. The mansion held its breath after Rodrigo's last scream. Smoke clung to the rafters, and the golden watch lay shattered in silence. Upstairs, chaos erupted. Isabel burst from her room, nightdress tangled around her ankles. She descended halfway before the sight stopped her. Her father's body sprawled. In steam and ruin, skin blistered and blackened. Her eyes widened, then rolled back as she fainted against the railing. Tiago struggled in Joaquim's grip, spitting curses through sobs. "Let me go! Let me!" His voice cracked. He had mimicked his father's cruelty, but now his boyish terror stripped him bare. Donna Beatriz appeared in the hall, her pale figure trembling. Her hands clutched her rosary, the beads rattling like bones. She looked at her husband's charred remains, and for a heartbeat her lips trembled into what might have been relief. Then she collapsed, fainting beside Isabel, her rosary scattering across the steps. Down in the kitchen, Marcelina stood still as stone, her face lit by dying embers. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her eyes locked on the fire. She did not run, she did not beg. She simply turned and walked out into the night, leaving the mansion behind her like a coffin already sealed. By morning, the plantation buzzed with feverish whispers. "She boiled him alive," one field hand whispered, eyes wide with awe. "No," another argued, "the devil took him. She was only the hand." "She sang while he burned," a third murmured, voice trembling. The truth twisted into myth before the ashes cooled. Children clung to their mothers in fear. Some slaves prayed to her name, calling her spirit protector. Others avoided her path entirely, whispering she carried fire in her very veins. But Joaquim, the overseer, would not let the legend rise unchallenged. His whip cracked through the quarters as he hunted her. "She will be found," he snarled, eyes bloodshot with rage and loyalty to a master now in ashes. "No dog escapes the hand that feeds." He searched the cane fields, tore apart the kitchens, forced confessions with lash and iron. Yet Marcelina moved like smoke. For 3 days, she vanished into the shadows of Bahia's sugar coast. Her silence, her shield. They caught her on the 4th night. It was Francisco who saw her first. The boy stood near the well, clutching a bundle of firewood. He spotted her slipping through the edge of the courtyard, her hair loose, her face gaunt but resolute. She lifted a finger to her lips, the same gesture she used when teaching him. To keep secrets in the kitchen. He wanted to let her pass, but a shout broke the moment, Joaquim's voice tearing through the night. "There! By the wall!" Torches swarmed, dogs barked. Marcelina did not run. She stood tall as the whip struck. Her back, the firelight dancing across her scars. Shackles bit into her wrists, but she did not cry out. The trial took place in the Grand Hall of Salvador, packed with colonists, priests, and trembling slaves. Father Gabriel stood at the side, quill in hand, recording every breath of the proceedings. The key. Magistrate's voice thundered, "You are accused of murdering your master, Dom Rodrigo de Almeida, with poison and fire. Do you deny it?" Marcelina raised her head. Her eyes swept across the crowd. She saw Beatriz pale and hollow, Isabel clutching her mother's hand, Tiago glaring through tears, and Joaquim burning with fury. She also saw Francisco standing, hidden in the back, his eyes glistening with fear. Her voice cut through the silence. "I deny nothing!" Gasps rippled through the room. The magistrate slammed his gavel. "Then you condemn yourself." She spoke again, calm, unshaken. "He killed my sister. He killed our songs. The fire is not mine. It is justice." A priest hissed, "Blasphemy!" Another crossed himself, muttering prayers. The magistrate delivered the verdict swiftly. "By fire you shall perish, as by fire you sinned." The day of execution, the square filled with bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. The air smelled of sweat, sea salt, and fear. Marcelina was bound to the stake, her arms stretched, ropes cutting into her flesh. Wood piled high at her feet. The sky hung low, thick with storm clouds. Father Gabriel whispered the last rites, his voice shaking. "Repent, child. Repent before the flames." She looked at him with quiet certainty. "I have already been purified." The torches touched the kindling. Flames crawled upward, hungry and bright. The crowd gasped as heat swallowed the square. Marcelina did not scream. She lifted her chin, her voice rising above the crackle of fire. She began to sing. It was Rosa's lullaby, soft, trembling, carrying across the wind. The melody wove through. The crowd, reaching mothers who wept, children who clung tighter, slaves who bowed their heads in reverence. Even Beatrice covered her face, trembling as the notes pierced her. Joachim growled, but even he faltered when her song grew stronger. Her words carried on smoke. The fire consumed her, but her voice lingered until the last breath. When it stopped, silence thundered across the square. Francisco, hidden at the edge, wept quietly. His small hands clutched the bone charm Mateus had once worn, now his secret talisman. He whispered the lullaby under his breath, a promise that the song would not die years later. He would tell the story, first in whispers, then in bold words, until the tale of Marcelina spread beyond Bahia. He would say, "She didn't run, she didn't beg, she sang," and the people would remember. The smoke of her death did not drift away. It clung to the streets, seeped into mouths and ears, and by nightfall the whispers began. In the taverns of Salvador, men leaned over mugs of rum and muttered, "The Witch of Fire." They claimed she had danced in the flames, her body untouched, her song louder than the crackle of wood. Sailors swore she walked the harbor that night, her face lit by embers, her eyes glowing like coals. In the plantations, however, the story was different. Around the cook fires, over pots of thin stew, the enslaved spoke of her with reverence. They called her a cocinera da justicia, the cook who fed justice. Mothers sang Rosa's lullaby to their children, but now the words carried new weight. It was no longer just a cradle song, it was a prayer, a rebellion in melody. Priests thundered from pulpits that she was a demon, a seductress of Satan who poisoned her master and mocked the holy order of society. But some among them, quiet, scribes, weary confessors, admitted her defiance in secret letters. One wrote, "She sang as flames rose. Tell me, what sinner does that unless her heart is cleaner than ours?" Decades passed. The cane grew and fell. Rodrigo's mansion decayed, its white walls cracked and blackened by mold. But the story did not die. In Bahia's kitchens, the tale was whispered by maids as they stirred pots. "Careful with the broth," they'd warn. "Remember Marcelina, one spoon can burn a man from the inside out." Children were hushed with it. "Mind your tongue or the cook of fire will take you." Yet in the same breath, slaves sang her lullaby to cradle their babies, turning fear into comfort. Two faces of one legend, witch and saint. By the 19th century, when new revolts brewed in the Sugar Coast, rebels invoked her name. Leaders of slave uprisings carved bone charms like Mateus's necklace, whispering that Marcelina's spirit walked beside them. They tied red ribbons to their wrists, symbols of fire and blood, and sang her lullaby before battle. Colonial soldiers, unnerved, called it the devil's hymn, but to the rebels it was a battle cry, the song of a woman who boiled her master alive and dared to sing while burning. Even centuries later, when slavery ended and Brazil shifted into new empires of wealth, her memory lived on. Bahia's storytellers kept her alive in markets, their words spiced with rumor. One version said she had vanished before the flames touched her, leaving only smoke behind. Another swore that her voice could still be heard in kitchens at midnight, humming the lullaby as pots rattled on their own. Grandmothers told children, "If you hear water boiling when no one stirs the fire, Marcelina is near. Cover your mouth. She comes to silence the cruel." But others told it differently. Revolutionaries whispered, "If you dream of fire, it means she is calling you. Rise." The motifs never faded. Fire became her crown. Chains became her broken relic. The boiling pot became her altar. And the lullaby, always the lullaby, threaded through time. From Rosa's lips to Marcelina's voice, to every child hushed by, mothers who remembered, she was villain, she was martyr, she was legend. In Bahia's kitchens centuries later, pots still simmered, flames still cracked. And sometimes, when the broth hissed just so, it sounded like a woman whispering through the steam, "Now I am everything." Justice has many names, and none of them are clean. What happened in Bahia was not a trial by law, nor by faith. It was a reckoning forged in silence, sharpened by hunger, and delivered with fire. Marcelina's knife, her boiling pot, her lullaby, all of them were weapons, all of them were prayers. Was she a murderer? By the court's tongue, yes. By the priest's sermon, yes. She poisoned, she burned, she destroyed the house that had destroyed her. But to those who carried chains, she was not a killer. She was the answer to prayers spoken into the dirt, the embodiment of a rage too long stifled. They saw her not as the devil's cook, but as the cook of justice. The line between vengeance and justice blurs when the world denies one side its voice. When chains silence the song of a sister, when fire becomes the only language left, what then is rebellion but survival turned inside out? Her story is not comfortable. It was never meant to be. Chains, fire, lullabies. These remain, not as artifacts of horror, but as symbols of memory. The golden watch stopped ticking. The lullaby did not. And so we are left with the question, was she a demon or a martyr? Did she burn a man? Or did she light a fire that still smolders in whispers centuries later? Perhaps the truth is simpler and heavier. When the oppressed are silenced long enough, silence itself becomes fire. And fire, once lit, will always find something to consume. If you were Marcelina, bound in chains, your sister broken in the cellar, her lullaby fading into silence under the hand of a tyrant, what would you have done? Would you have knelt, forgiven, prayed for mercy that never came? Or would you have stood by the fire, knife in hand, and burned it all down? History does not give us easy answers. It leaves us with ashes, songs, and the echo of a woman's voice in the flames. Some call her a murderer, others a martyr. But in the end, the choice she made forces us to confront our own silence, our own limits. So I'll ask you, not as a listener, but as a witness, if the chains were yours, if the blood was your family's, if the silence was carved into your tongue, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. Share your truth. And if this story struck you, if it unsettled you, if it lit even a spark of reflection, then subscribe for more dark history, more buried legends, more voices that refuse to stay silent. Because silence, as Marcelina taught us, always carries fire.